Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are putting on our lead auditor hats to explore how ISO 14001:2026 takes a dusty binder full of environmental promises and actually transforms it into a living, breathing operational system. So often organizations view environmental management as just this massive collection of documents, something you nervously show an auditor once a year and then totally forget about. Well, the 2026 standard, it demands a lot more than that. It requires a system that actively produces verifiable results. So grab your notebooks. Let's break down exactly how you move from a symbolic check-the-box exercise to a dynamic framework that drives real, measurable sustainability. Okay, here is our roadmap for today. We'll start by defining your boundaries, then move into policy and compliance, tackle integrating your system into daily operations, break down aspects and objectives, and finally, look at managing planned organizational change. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. Defining your EMS boundaries. We are establishing the scope under Clause 4.3.
Now, a classic auditor trap we see all the time is the concept of artificial limitation. Imagine a company deciding to carve out their high-emission warehouse, or maybe a facility where they store hazardous substances, entirely from their scope. Why? Just to simplify the audit and look good on paper. It's essentially the corporate equivalent of sweeping dirt under the rug. And let me tell you, lead auditors actively hunt for this kind of gerrymandering. If you try to carve out the really difficult, high-impact areas of your business, you're heavily distorting your actual environmental risk profile. Doing this completely defeats the purpose of the standard, and it will almost certainly trigger a major nonconformance the second an auditor catches on.
So, to ensure genuine compliance, your scope absolutely must reflect your environmental reality. The standard really emphasizes a true life cycle perspective here. This means encompassing everything from your direct manufacturing processes and physical factories all the way down to your outsourced waste management. You really can't just look at what happens inside your own four walls anymore. You have to look at the organizational units you control and the outsourced processes you influence. Think about it. If you determine the disposal methods for a contracted waste treatment operation, well, that falls firmly within your sphere of influence. You can't just pass the buck to a third party and wash your hands of it. The 2026 standard demands end-to-end accountability.
Moving right along to Section 2. Policy, Prevention, and Compliance. This is all about turning commitments into measurable action, under Clause 5.2.
Let's think about a factory that's physically realizing its pollution prevention commitment. Instead of just writing some nice words in a glossy corporate brochure, they actually get to work. They identify a high-risk air emission source right on the factory floor, physically install an advanced air filtration system to tackle it, and establish strict operational control parameters to keep it running smoothly. This is proactive mitigation in action. Clause 5.2 represents an absolutely critical link between strategic leadership and actual on-the-ground outcomes. You can't just casually state that you intend to be green. You have to explicitly commit to fulfilling compliance obligations and actively preventing pollution at the source long before it ever leaves your facility.
And right after that physical installation happens, we look for the proof. Boom, a green compliance checklist comes into play, explicitly verifying adherence to strict regulatory emission limits. When auditors see that your volatile organic compound, or VOC levels, are actually testing below legal thresholds, and that your compliance obligation register is actively updated, that is the triumphant aha moment for sure. It perfectly bridges that gap between a written policy and a verified measurable action. It proves your policy isn't just an empty promise. It's a real mechanism driving quantifiable environmental protection day in and day out.
All right, Section 3, Integrating EMS into Operations. We are breaking down the silos under Clause 4.4.
Historically, companies would just toss all their environmental duties to one poor compliance officer, isolated down in a basement office somewhere, surrounded by stacks of paper. Well, that outdated paper EMS approach, strictly forbidden now. What we want is a living EMS. That means procurement and maintenance are actively driving environmental goals right alongside their standard production metrics. Environmental criteria need to be baked directly into the software that schedules your production batches. Your environmental scores should carry heavy weight when you're selecting new suppliers. When your finance team is considering environmental risks alongside financial risks, and your maintenance crew sees emission control as just a normal part of their daily routine, that is when you've hit true operational integration.
Top management cannot simply delegate accountability down the chain and forget about it. They have to ensure environmental responsibilities are distributed across all functions. Otherwise, you end up with a fragmented, totally ineffective system. Seriously, if your operational managers on the factory floor don't know what their specific environmental responsibilities are, your system is failing. It really is that simple. True integration means environmental considerations influence decision-making at every single level of the corporate structure. It's the core difference between just grabbing a superficial certification for a quick marketing push and achieving genuine, long-term environmental improvement.
Which brings us to Section 4, Aspects, Impacts, and Objectives. Let's navigate clauses 6.1 and 6.2. Okay, so we really need to clearly distinguish an environmental aspect from the resulting impact. This is pretty much the analytical foundation of the entire system. The aspect is what you actually do. It's the resource you consume, the waste you generate, or the noise you make. Think about driving your car, right? The aspect is that operational interaction, consuming fuel and creating exhaust. The impact, on the other hand, is the resulting change to the environment, whether that's adverse or beneficial. So, sticking with the car, the impact is the greenhouse gas emissions actually entering the atmosphere. You have to clearly separate the action from the consequence.
Because if you don't map your aspects to their direct impacts accurately, you are fundamentally flying blind to your biggest operational risks. You have to clearly draw the line from, say, a welding operation directly to the air pollution it causes, or from chemical storage directly to the soil and groundwater contamination risks, from logistics fuel consumption directly to greenhouse gas emissions. Make sense? Once you map these all out, you then evaluate their significance. You look at severity, legal exposure, and stakeholder concern to figure out exactly where you need to focus your limited time and resources for the biggest impact.
Now here's another massive auditor trap, the vague corporate promise. We've all seen statements like, "We aim to operate responsibly and minimize our environmental footprint." I mean, sure, it's a wonderful PR sentiment, but in an ISO audit, it's a non-conformance waiting to happen. How exactly do you measure responsibly? You can't, and if you can't measure it, you have no baseline. Without a baseline, you literally cannot prove to an auditor or your stakeholders that you are continually improving. Vague objectives are the ultimate enemy of effective management.
So, the crucial takeaway here is that a good objective must be highly measurable. Imagine committing to reduce VOC emissions by 18% within 2 years. Now that is a smart objective. Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. When you attach a hard number, a clear baseline, and a strict timeline like that, you instantly create accountability. You know exactly what needs to be monitored, what operational controls need to be installed, and what specific data needs to be gathered for your next review. All that fuzzy ambiguity is completely gone. Finally, let's look at Section 5, Managing Planned Organizational Change, Avoiding Unmanaged Risks, under Clause 6.3.
Let's walk through a little cautionary tale. Imagine a factory expansion that goes horribly wrong simply because the environmental consequences were just an afterthought. In month 1, the company happily adds a brand new production line to increase capacity. High fives all around. But in month 2, they completely bypass the environmental impact assessment just to save some time. Bad idea. By month 3, that new line pushes them right past their permitted legal emission limits. And in month 4, the auditor arrives, hands them a major nonconformance, and halts production entirely. It's the ultimate example of reactive management, and it absolutely destroys the integrity of your system.
To maintain compliance and avoid that nightmare, you must proactively allocate resources and revise your objectives before introducing new automation or changing raw material suppliers. If you decide to bring in a new supplier from a region with totally different regulations or adopt untested building materials, you have to assess those life cycle impacts prior to making the change. You need to ensure you have the budget allocated, the trained personnel in place, and the monitoring equipment ready to go before the switch is flipped. Your system has to evolve ahead of the business, not constantly play catch-up afterwards.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a real challenge. Take a close look at your own organization. Is your environmental management system genuinely driving operational change, or is it literally just a symbolic binder gathering dust on a shelf? Are your objectives actually measurable? Are your aspects properly mapped? Is your top management fully integrated into the daily grind? True sustainability requires relentless action, structured planning, and continuous improvement. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into ISO 14001-2026. Now, get out there and make your EMS a living, breathing part of your success story.